He's one of the industry's most respected executive recruiters. He's the founder and CEO of the DEDIC Group and the host of DEDIC TV, Jason DEDIC.
Hello everybody, I'm Jason DEDIC and you're listening to DEDIC TV. Today I have a great interview for you. He holds an engineering and a master's in civil engineering from the University of Nevada, Reno. He spent 23 years with Kleinfelder, the last 7 as president and CEO. We're honored to have Bill Siegel on DEDIC TV. Bill, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today.
Glad to be here.
We have a lot of topics that I'd like to discuss. First, I'd like to start with leadership. How do you inspire and motivate people to follow your direction?
You know, Jason, I think the most important thing is to have a clear and compelling vision and to be able to explain that to the people that you're hoping will follow you. Nobody's going to follow you just because you say, hey, follow me, or I'd like you to follow me. You have to explain it, what's in it for them, why it's a good vision, to be able to explain the pros and cons and why the course you've taken. And if you can explain that clear and compelling vision and you can get people excited about it, then they're going to follow you as a leader.
So how do you take that model from inspiring, motivating individuals to motivate an entire organization to execute as a whole?
That's a great question because that's clearly the hard part. You know, it's one thing to have the clear and compelling vision, but then, you know, it has to flow through the whole organization. And I really think that's all about alignment. That's about making sure that, you know, everything from your systems and processes to your reward systems are consistent with that message. You know, if you say, hey, we're going to go here, but part of your organization is rewarding people or punishing people or whatever based upon a different message, then you get confusion. When you get confusion, things fall apart. So I think the key to motivating it throughout the organization is to make sure that you're completely aligned top to bottom with how you're going and that all your rewards and your systems and, you know, it's that classic Harvard 7S model, making sure that you have everything together. Now, once you have that, you have to clearly communicate and continue to communicate time and time and time again. Interestingly enough, before I became CEO in my last job, you know, I tried to reach out to a few people and they said the number one thing is after you've been in a while, you're going to realize you needed to communicate more and you should have moved faster. And I can tell you after 7 years, probably my only regrets are I should have communicated even more and I should have moved faster.
Right.
You know, so clearly that continual reinforcement and communication from the CEO desk is critical.
Right. What's the toughest decision you've ever had to make in your professional career?
For me, the toughest decisions always revolve around people. It's a people business, and I don't care whether you're in manufacturing or in financial services or a classic service industry, it's still all about people.
Right.
And when you're talking about making a decision that impacts somebody else's lives, I don't think you're a good leader if that isn't really hard on you. Now, that doesn't mean you don't make the decisions. It doesn't mean you don't make the right decisions, but it shouldn't be just flippant. You know, you have to think hard. You have to realize you're dealing with people, you're dealing with people's lives. And therefore, to me, the hardest decisions are always revolving around individuals. And I hope that never changes about me. I hope I never get jaded, and that's never the hardest thing that I have to deal with.
Right. I completely agree with that. And, you know, on the topic of people, when you're hiring somebody, what do you look for in that person outside of, you know, the technical capabilities that would be needed in the role?
Well, I think you have two parts to that. You know, the first part is, you know, personality, and the second part is other skills. So let's take those separately. You know, from a personality perspective, I think everybody has their own preferences. You know, I like go-getters. You know, I have no problem with somebody who's ambitious and wants to go forward. Somebody who's always willing to learn, wants to hear about the business and wants to understand the business. You know, for me, those are the best people because no matter what assignment you give them, they're going to figure out a way to get it done, and they're the kind of people that are going to take on the organization once you're long gone. From a skills perspective, you know, the number one skill that seems to get overlooked but is critical out there is communication. You know, my experience has been primarily in the technical world, and there's a lot of brilliant technical people, but if you can't explain your ideas, explain your decisions, then you're toast. And so that ability. So I'm looking for somebody with the right attitude who can communicate. That moves you to the top of the list in my world.
Right. Absolutely. When you look at corporate responsibility, what are your views on corporate responsibility, and what role should an organization play in contributing back to their communities?
Boy, that's a hot topic these days. That's for sure. You know, I think without getting too deeply philosophical about, the concept of giving back or responsibility, I think the reality is in the modern business climate, corporations have a lot of stakeholders. It's not just the employees and the shareholders, but it's the communities that they work in. It's the government officials that, like it or not, are part of their business and oversee it. There's just lots of different stakeholders. And I think any good business understands that they have a responsibility to all of those stakeholders. You can't put one necessarily ahead of the others. You can't say, we're going to make profit and then we're going to forget about the communities we work in. And, but the same token, you can't be so focused on, keeping the government happy or the communities happy, you don't make a profit. So
right.
A good business, that's all, that whole corporate responsibility is all about understanding that in the modern world, you have a lot of stakeholders and you need to address all of those stakeholders.
In your opinion, what do companies do right and what do companies do wrong in this area?
Well, I think that I think that you see a lot of companies that do a very good job of philanthropy, and I think you see them as the desire to being part of their communities, and so I think that that's a pretty common thing that's going on out there, and I think a lot of companies do it right. They find a charity, they find something that works that they can help people with, and they really do a good job in their communities. Sometimes what they do wrong is I think that businesses sometimes get a little bit too focused on that charity aspect instead of reaching out and realizing, again, you have all the different stakeholders. So as a business, you should not only care about, helping people out and being part of the community from, say, a charitable perspective, but I believe very importantly that you need to be part of, business organizations and trade groups and all the people that are involved in your organization, because there's so many different stakeholders and interest groups out there. And I think sometimes companies say, if I just do a good business and I give, quote, give back, unquote, to the community through charitable things, then I'm okay.
Right.
And I see too many companies that don't realize that they absolutely positively need to be part of the conversation within their industry or their market segment, because there's so much going on in that area.
Well, right. And at the end of the day, if you're not making money, you can't give any of it back.
Well, clearly. And if, you're not making money because of other forces or because of market changes or whatever else, it's not going to do you any good, because you're right. You can't give it back if you don't make it.
Right. Talking about government and the regulations that exist in the industry right now, in your opinion, what role should the government play in the private sector?
Well, without getting into any political and picking one side of the aisle or the other, I will say that I'm a firm believer in a small but effective government.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is that the government is your business partner if you're in business. That sort of comes with the corporate charter. The fact that you're allowed to have a business is from the consent of the government, which in theory is from the consent of the governed. So that's the system that we have, and you have to understand that your government is your partner in business. I just personally believe that it should be a limited partner, that it should be in there enough to prevent abuses and to make sure that you're looking after all of your stakeholders, but the government shouldn't be directing the private sector. I mean, that's the beauty of the private sector, right? Is that you have market forces and you have people that are looking to succeed in business and do the right kinds of things, and they should be allowed to do that without having to get approval from the government every step of the way. So I believe in government, overlooking the private sector, but in a smart and effective manner and not an all-encompassing and overbearing manner.
Right. If there's anything that we discussed today, I will agree with you on that more than anything. Because it's really the fact of how effective the government will be when it is governing the private sector, right? And effectiveness is incredibly important.
Absolutely. And I think that's, if you talk to any business person, there's probably two complaints they get. One is shifting rules, not necessarily knowing where they stand, because
Absolutely.
Most of us understand that if you tell us, here's the rules, we'll follow them. But it seems like the rules and the goalposts are always changing on us. And then the second part is, okay, if you're gonna supervise us, great, but let's be efficient, effective, and not basically just drain my resources because of your inefficiency in your job.
Absolutely. So from the perspective of the construction and the engineering industry, what impact, either positive or negative, has the government and the environmental regulations that exist today had on the industry?
Well, let's face it, anybody related to anything in the environmental industry owes the government for a lot of our business, because we the government basically has regulations that drive a lot of the actions that happen in the architecture and engineering industry and really the construction industry overall, whether it's designing, treatment plants for water or air quality permitting and compliance. I mean, you think about all the government rules and regulations, businesses have to hire consulting engineers and scientists to stay in compliance and to do that work. Mm-hmm. So certainly the government has driven that business, even if maybe I sometimes think it's to excess, certainly it does drive that business. But if you look at then the other part is what it does on us individually. I can tell you it's a difficult time to be in business. I mean, business is hard. And not only do you have to worry about the competitive market environment, but you have a million government regulations, some of which, as I said, aren't even well understood. And they're not going away. They're getting more. And whether it's, dealing with how you have to handle your employees, whether it's, cybersecurity and how you're dealing with data and information, whether it's, regulations and on your physical, the whole OSHA and ADA compliance and everything else. I mean, just the government is just in your business everywhere, and you have to understand that. So it generates business for our industry that I'm familiar with, but it also makes it hard to operate within that because it's in there in everything you do.
Right, absolutely, and especially when you look at environmental regulations, like you said, once a regulation is passed and it's put into play, it will not go away. It's not going to be repealed.
Yeah, your best hope is if something's put in place that becomes obsolete, unneeded, or is proven to be sort of not a good idea, your best hope is to get it modified and changed because it's pretty darn hard to have everything go away.
Right. In your opinion, how should organizations confront these increasing regulations? Is there anything that can be done from a business perspective?
Well, I'm a big personal believer in, is speaking up in the right way as a business. And that's why I believe in trade associations and trade groups where you can have a combined joint voice that, can go to the government and sort of say, okay, here's a better way. Here's an idea. Let's modify it. Let's adjust this. If you just walk in and say, we don't want to be regulated, then you have no hope of that ever passing.
Right.
Just put it right there. That's not going to happen. But if you can walk in and say, okay, look, we understand the need for regulations in this area based upon science and experience and what's going on in the world and the technology that we have today. Here's a great way of doing this. And then hopefully working with, receptive government officials to come up with the right regulations for both, the engineering firms and their clients to deal with those regulations.
Right. Absolutely. So another topic that I wanted to discuss with you is, obviously, I'm an executive recruiter. And whenever we go out to search, the number one component that's always brought forward is the importance of corporate culture to make sure that this executive will be able to assimilate into the organization's corporate culture successfully. In your opinion, how important is corporate culture to the overall success of an organization?
Well, I think it's pretty darn important. I mean, there's an old saying that, culture trumps strategy every time. And, I think that in my experience, that's been pretty true in life. I think culture starts at the founding of an organization. It's pretty hard to sort of take an organization and change culture. I think it's important to start at the founding and the principles of the people that start the business. If they're good business people and they have the right kind of culture, that sort of permeates throughout the organization. And I think it's critical. I mean, let's face it, we're all people. We all have to work. We want a job. We want to do good for society. We want to think that we've made a difference in the world. So people, I think, are generally all the same, but that doesn't mean companies are all the same. And different companies have different cultures, whether it's, again, come from the founders of the company or just the markets they're in. It's pretty critical. So to me, culture is everything. Getting that cultural match is critical in the hiring process, finding people that fit the culture. And if you're looking for a job, I think it's critical to find a company that you could feel pride in working for and you want to go to work every day. To me, that's more important than, who's going to pay you that extra dollar or have some extra little benefit that you have.
Right. Absolutely. How do you create a strong corporate culture? Let's say you're, 5-10 years within a business and you're trying to create a culture that everybody can get behind. How do you execute that?
So, Yeah, I think the last part you said, how do you execute that? So I'll start at the beginning. We started this whole conversation today talking about leadership and the idea of having a clear and compelling vision and making it clear what you're working for together so that people can get behind it and can be part of the team moving forward. So if you start with that, then you really talk about the execution of that. The execution of that is, again, back to the alignment piece, making sure that as a business from top to bottom, you're aligned consistent with that vision and the culture you want to have. And if I would throw one little point out there, it has to be 100% consistent through the organization, because if you're a leader and you understand the leadership role, people are always watching you. And the first time you say, look, this is going to be our culture, this is how we're going to operate. And the first time you sort of go back on that and say, well, yeah, but circumstances of stuff, I'm going to skip it this time, or I'm not going to 100% comply. People see that and your credibility goes right out the window. So you need to be clear on what the culture is. You need to make sure that it's aligned from top to bottom of the organization, and then you need to 100% follow it. Now, circumstances change. The world changes. And if that's the case, that's where the communication comes in. You have to say, look, this is why this decision is consistent with our culture. Sometimes you have to make short-term decisions so you can live the fight the next day. And if you had a business that said, look, our culture is going to be to never have to lay anybody off, besides being unrealistic, the fact of the matter is, at some point in your business cycle, you're probably going to be in that universe.
Right.
And at that point, you have to say, here's why we're making this decision, because we want to live and fight for another day. But in the short term, we have to make a tough call.
Right. If you have a poorly operating corporate culture, what do you need to do to right that ship? If things are not going the way either they were laid out to go, or you want to change the way things are going, what do you need to do to make that happen?
When I've seen companies that have a poor culture, I think it all comes back to inconsistency and then poor leadership overall. And I think that, if you're trying to change the culture around, you have to address it head on. You have to identify, what is bad of the culture. You have to then identify what you're going to do differently, how you're going to execute and make sure that's reinforced throughout the organization. Then you got to follow through on it. So it's a very systematic process in my mind. You just can't waltz in and say, well, I know culture's this way, but I want it to be that way going forward. It just doesn't happen that way. And there's always going to be all kinds of naysayers and people. And quite frankly, culture change often means personnel change. Mm-hmm. And you go into an organization that has a poor culture, it got that way. It didn't get that way on accident. Typically there's somebody in there that either doesn't believe in the culture or has their own culture that they're trying to implement or their own agenda. And sometimes you have to clean out people that aren't consistent with where you want to go.
Right. So talking about culture and execution, what is your greatest professional success?
It'd be, when you say my personal, I would say you can look at it two different ways. Clearly, being selected to be CEO of a large, consulting engineering firm was quite an honor on the personal side. So if you were to look at it from that perspective, just that simple process. But I feel like if you were to look at what I executed and the professional success that I did, it's really taking a firm that was very much a U.S.-oriented geo-environmental firm and planting the seed that we needed to be a globally competitive architecture and engineering firm, and then following through and executing on that process. Under my leadership, Kleinfelder, where I formerly worked, went from that geo-environmental firm to a full-service firm, and we went from being just in parts of the U.S. to throughout North America and the Pacific. And so, to me, that would be by far the greatest action that came about from my leadership.
Right, absolutely. I was watching you guys pretty closely, and you were building a heck of a power business over there as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we started off again as a geo-environmental firm, and we realized that the world was changing, and that was not going to be enough for us. And so we expanded the environmental services, added water, wastewater engineering, structural design, quite a bit of electrical power design, substation work, and then the last piece, the last company that we acquired that was added to Kleinfelder actually did a lot of in-plant engineering, mechanical, electrical engineering, servicing the chemical and oil and gas industries, because that's a lot more that's being outsourced to individual companies, and we felt like we had something to offer that. So. It was definitely a change. It wasn't the same company as when I certainly joined it 30 years ago.
Right. So what sets you apart from your peers and the other people that are in the industry?
That's a hard question to answer because of the fact that, I have so much respect for the people that that I work with. I've been lucky in my career to be elected, chairman of one of the trade groups that represents the largest firms in our industry. I think that is quite a compliment, and so it's hard for me to say that I'm so much better. But I will tell you that what I have been complimented a lot from my peers in the past is my willingness to think ahead, to not think of business as usual, but to look at something and realize that the world's changing and that our industry is changing, and to try to stay in front of it. And that applied whether it was with Kleinfelder, when I said, hey, look, the world wasn't good. We just weren't going to make it as a small geo-environmental firm, to my leadership of this trade group when I said, hey, we as a trade group got to start looking at problems a different way. I always got a lot of compliments from people, my willingness to change and to stay ahead of the times rather than just sort of be reactive and try to stick with the old ways.
How do you manage people? Everybody has a different management style. What is yours?
Yeah, when I hire people, I tell them really clearly that I'm not going to hold their hand on a daily basis. That's not my personality, and it's not something that I'm comfortable with. And so I have to hire. It all starts with hiring, and so I make sure that I hire people that don't need that daily hand holding. I'm going to give them regular feedback, regular check-ins. I'm going to communicate thoroughly with people, but I'm going to expect them to be able to operate on their own and to be able to be responsible for their areas. I mean, obviously, if I'm hiring them for a job, I'll give them the tools, I'll give them the resources, and I'll give them the support and mentoring and coaching, all that they need. But ultimately, they need to do their job, and I'm not going to do it for them. And so I very much make that clear to people when I hire them. And there's a certain kind of people that really gravitate toward that, and we work well together. I've had trouble in the past with people that are looking for me to give them an answer on a daily basis, because if I have that case, I don't need them if I have to do their job for them.
Right. So you've explained how you motivate other people, but how do you motivate and challenge and push yourself?
Luckily, I'm fairly self-motivated. I don't have to motivate myself because I'm just very motivated. I love the industry I'm in. I love people. I love getting out there and meeting people and interacting with people. I love a challenge. I love to solve problems. And you start looking at all those things, and to me, it's I get up in the morning every morning excited about what I'm going to do. Not saying, okay, go do it today, Bill. I wake up saying, wow, I can't wait to get at it. So I'm pretty lucky that way. I would give credit to my grandparents, were sort of children of the Depression, who instilled in me a pretty heavy dose of a work ethic. And that's been lucky for me. That's stuck with me my whole life.
Absolutely. Who do you admire then? That's a good kind of a segue to this question, but who do you admire most professionally, but also personally?
Well, on the personal side, certainly, I look to some members of my family for inspiration. My grandfather was, I love to tell stories about my grandfather. He was from the panhandle of Texas and came out to California in the Depression. And he used to tell me stories that basically he went out the first day and had 3 job offers the first day he looked for a job. And he goes, they weren't great. One was a janitor and one was parking cars. And I don't remember what the third one was. But the bottom line is if you were willing to work, you could get a job. And he was willing to work, and he got a job. And he was a very successful man his whole life because he was willing to work and to do what it took. And so to me, I always admire that. And, the ability, I'm the first college graduate in my family, and he helped make sure that happened. And I always admired him from that. On the professional side, it's interesting because you look at people in our industry, and I've always admired those people that can stand up and speak out for the architecture and engineering world. People that have been able to explain why it's so important for society what we do. Let's face it, I'm an engineer by training. I sort of fell into it, but I love it. And I think what we do is critical for the quality of life in America. I think that, people in America depend on, when the light switch turns on, the lights come on. And when the tap opens, then fresh, clean water comes out. And I take great pride in being just a small part of that. And those people that can effectively explain that and tell the world why what we do is so important is people that I've always admired.
Absolutely. Did you have a mentor?
I did. That's actually how I sort of got into engineering. And by the way, when you ask a mentor, a lot of people ask a mentor. I'm a firm believer you should not have a mentor, because if you just have a mentor, then you're going to maybe do exactly what that one mentor. So I always tell young people to get dozens of mentors. Find anybody that's willing to share with you their wisdom, grab it and take it and run with it, because you don't want to just hook up with a person who has a certain way of doing things, because then all you're going to learn is their way of doing things. And to really maximize your own potential, you need to have lots of different inputs, find out what works for your style, your personality, and then blend them all together to be the best person you can be. So I'm a big believer in having lots of mentors. But that qualifier said, I worked my way through college, and one of the things I did is I worked in the asphalt lab, testing asphalt cement and asphalt concrete, and I had a professor there. And when I got my undergraduate degree, he's the one that tracked me down and said, "Hey, would you consider being my research assistant and going to graduate school and working for me?" And he was really the guy that got me convinced that I could be a great consultant and that I could work in this business for a long time. And he had a lot of great sayings and a lot of great ideas. One of my favorite ones of his is he said, "Bill, when you I'm trying to remember exactly how he phrased it to me. He goes, well, he said, when you want to do something the least, it's probably when you need to do it the most." And I've always kept that in mind. When you go back to the ethical decisions, when you really want to do it the least, it's probably the most important time to do the right thing.
Right. Absolutely. With technology these days as well, there's so much information about people that's out there that you can actually have mentors that you don't even know, right? You can read people's books if you like what they have to say, or you can watch interviews or listen to interviews, and you can find a mentor, that might live in another country, might live completely across our country, and you follow them closely. And if they have enough important stuff to say, you can kind of be mentored by somebody you've never met. Absolutely right. I fully agree. Do you mentor anybody now, or have you in the past?
Yeah, actually, all the time. Besides professionally, I have a number of people that have reached out to me, and I encourage people to feel free to reach out. I always want to make time. People always made time for me, and I want to make time for other people. I also advise my college fraternity at San Diego State, and sit actually for my college engineering school on their advisory board. So that all involves getting involved with young people and mentoring. And then certainly through my career, through Kleinfelder and other companies, I've actively been involved in helping people out. So yeah, all the time.
So what's the big picture accomplishment in your career?
Well, interesting question. I will say that when I started out, again, being the first college graduate in my family, I don't think I knew what I really wanted to get out of a career. And then after a few years of business, I thought, okay, I'm pretty good at this. And, I think that I would like to be, either have my own firm or be a part owner in a firm and somehow be in the leadership role, because I think I had a lot to offer. Mm-hmm. And looking back over my career, I succeeded beyond maybe my wildest dreams. I mean, even early in my career, I said, I think I could be CEO, and I felt like that was a job I could handle, but I wasn't going to let that define myself. Had I never been that, I still would have had an awesome career. But as it turned out, I got the job, and so clearly working my way up through the company and succeeding at different levels and getting selected for that ultimate position was quite an accomplishment. And no matter what else I do in the next stage of my life, that's always an accomplishment I'll be proud of.
No, absolutely, and you should be. What's the biggest mistake you've made in your career, and what did you learn from it?
Oh man, I've made so many. It's hard to start going on a list of
you and me both.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of mistakes is they're only really bad. I always felt like people used to say, there's a saying, mistakes are only bad if you don't learn from them. Clearly, mistakes are also bad if you've hurt somebody in the process, because I don't ever want to have that situation where my decisions hurt somebody or caused a problem. I've had lots of things where I've made poor decisions on, chasing projects or, quite frankly, I can't say that I've always made the best personnel decisions. I've hired some people that have worked out and plenty of people that haven't worked out. I've had to adjust staff, and most of the time I think I've got it right, but there's times then I didn't get it right there either. So I don't know if I have a single biggest mistake, but I fully admit to making lots of mistakes. And hopefully I've learned from them and moved forward from there.
Can you tell us about a time when you've had to go way outside of your comfort zone?
Oh my gosh. I was just telling someone the story about this the other day. I think as human beings, unless you're an HR professional, dealing with HR issues is sometimes the most uncomfortable thing for leaders to have to deal with. And, whether that is, substance abuse issues and having to confront people and deal with that, or, quite frankly, I guess the best way I could describe this is, whether it's sexual harassment or marital infidelities or issues that are impacting work, those are just very difficult, uncomfortable conversations to have. You have to have them. You have to deal with it. But if you're saying what's out of my comfort zone, that's probably out of my comfort zone.
Right. No, I can completely understand that. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
If I could pick one little simple thing that was given to me, as I had our former HR director years ago told me, Bill, read for a purpose. And I thought that was very interesting advice. And basically what he was saying is, if you like to read, which I do like to read, he's like, do it for a purpose. If you want to learn about, financial stuff, read books and biographies about famous financial leaders. Read about J.P. Morgan or Cornelius Vanderbilt or, any of those people. He said, take the time that you're going to put in anyway and read for a purpose. And I will say over the course of my career, that's been very good advice to take.
It's funny that you actually say that. If you look at my like the desktop on my computer, it's a picture of The Men Who Built America, that the episode that History Channel did on the founders of the country, or the founders of the Industrial Revolution, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's going to be probably a lot of mid-level executives and maybe even graduating college students that are going to be listening to this program online. What advice do you have for them?
I've got this question a lot, and I actually hate to say I've come up with a stock answer, but I've come up with what are sort of Bill's only three rules for managing your career. Mm-hmm. The first thing is to always keep learning. And I know that everybody says that, but it's because it's so true. You constantly have to keep learning, whether it's right out of school or you've been in the business 30 years, you have to constantly push yourself to keep learning, learn something new, to improve yourself, better yourself. That's just the nature of the world we live in. And quite frankly, in a globally competitive market, it's critical. But I think it's also important for human development. That's what I encourage my own children to do, is to constantly be learning. So that's number one. The second thing is, I always tell people that you have to be in charge of your own career. One thing I see a lot these days is people expecting somebody to come to them and say, okay, here's your next step. Here's the next step. Now you need to do this. It's great to ask for help. It's great to ask for mentors and get their opinions, but you have to be in charge of your own career. And you have to take an active role in that. And that goes hand in hand with the learning, but it's also in just making sure that you are conscious of the fact that it's your career and you need to do what's best for you and not just sort of wait for somebody to do something for you. And then my third point is, I always tell people to be willing to take a chance. Now I would say, it's a calculated risk. Don't just go out there and just take a flyer on something because you have to take a chance, but don't be afraid to raise your hand, to volunteer for an assignment, to volunteer to take on a new job, to do something different that's going to give you different experiences or different skills. Again, far too many people wait for somebody to say, okay, now you need to do this, or wait, instead of looking around and saying, well, heck, I'll try that, or I'm willing to give this a shot. I think that's something that is lacking, and especially in industries drawn to a lot of conservative people. And I think that your career will go a lot farther if you're willing to take advantage of opportunities to get new experiences and build new skills. And so raising that hand and volunteering is important.
No, right, absolutely. How have you seen business change in the span of your career?
Well, it's completely changed, and I think it's not just in the business I'm most familiar with, but just the business world and the world overall, driven so much by technology. I'll confess that when I did my master's thesis, I wrote it all on a Commodore 64. That at the time, the really hot computer had 64, kilobytes of random storage, and had these big floppy disks that I could put about a 10 or 12 page chapter on.
Right.
I was pretty hot at the time. I was ahead of the game. And I could do programming and I could do stuff on it. I was way ahead of the game. And now, this dang computer that I'm logging into is something that just wasn't even conceivable at that time. If you think about other than in science fiction. And so the whole concept of technology, and then that technology then drives competition. It drives, commodification in the marketplace. I mean, it's much more, I mean, if you look at some of the businesses, not just in the engineering and consulting world, but even in the legal worlds, they're all struggling with the challenge that technology is so good that you don't need as much of the human input to it. So to me, it's just so much more competitive. It's so much more on a global scale, and it's so more driven by technology and the use of technology than it was before. It's just a completely different universe. Now, all that said, still comes back to people, right? Mm-hmm. And so good people that know how to use those tools are hugely valuable, and people that don't know how to use those tools are not nearly as valuable. So, everybody has those tools, but the people that can best use those tools and that can best serve the clients and do work with those tools are the ones that are most valuable out there.
Right. And with new technology, it allows companies to spend more time executing whatever the task was at hand and doing it, quite frankly, for a lot cheaper. There are so many, whether they're software or programs that are out there that quite frankly are free for small business. And now when you talk about large engineering firms, obviously you have to pay for that and have a subscription to it and everything like that. But technology allows companies to adapt and to execute so much quicker, obviously, than it did 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Yep.
So what's the biggest challenge facing our industry right now?
Interestingly enough, we've been talking about technology because I think that's one of the biggest challenges. But I think of it in two different ways, if I could expand upon that. The first way is, that increasing technology drives, commodification, treating professionals, whether they're architects, engineers, scientists, lawyers, whatever, is a commodity and not differentiating. And so as an industry, that has been and that continues to be one of the top challenges. Now, I believe going beyond that is I think technology ultimately is going to change the very way that we operate as a business and as an industry. And I'll give you an example. As recently in an industry meeting, I asked people, I said, here's the current scenario. If you win a design of, say, a bridge, a structural design of a bridge, and I'll just make up some numbers, but say it's a $2 million contract, you might have a team of 20 people working on it for 6 months, and you're going to design that bridge. And the way it works with the DOTs in the U.S., the Departments of Transportation, you basically charge them an hourly rate, basically, which is some multiplier of the individual salary. So that's sort of the business model that's built into the design of infrastructure right now. So if you have a $10 an hour person and you can charge them 2.6 times their salary, you charge a client $26.
Right.
So everybody says, yeah, you're right, Bill, that's how the world works. In 5 years, when that same bridge design can be done by one person with a really powerful computer program, what are you going to bill your clients? Are you going to bill them the same $2 million? Or are you going to bill them whatever that one person is times whatever markup you can get on his time? Mm-hmm. I mean, did your $2 million fee just turn into a $200,000 fee?
Right.
And they all look, oh, that's not going to happen. And I'm like, it's coming. So to me, I feel that threat to the industry, that ability for anybody with a strong computer program to work out of their house is going to totally disrupt the industry overall.
No, that's a good point. If you weren't in business, what would you be doing with your career?
Oh, my wife swears I should be a teacher because I love to share the knowledge that I have. Although I don't think I have the patience, and I don't know if it's exciting enough for me to do that.
Right.
I have. If I wasn't in the engineering world, I would probably be involved in some sort of the merger and acquisition world, just because, I seem to have the knack to understand, how to take two organizations and take the best of both organizations and build a greater combined organization and to make money doing that. So I seem to have the knack for that. So that's probably where I would have ended up if I had not been a consulting engineer. And maybe I'll still end up there someday. You never know.
Right. A little bit of a personal question. What are your favorite activities? What do you like to do outside of the office?
It depends on seasonal activities. Certainly I love to golf. And so as long as the weather's good and depending on where I happen to be at the time, I absolutely love to golf. In the winter, I love to snowboard in Colorado. Go fishing is whether it's mountains or ocean, I enjoy that quite a bit. And then, of course, I mentioned before, I love to read, just it's a chance to catch up on stuff. And I'm just an action kind of guy. I'm not, reading's probably the only time I sit down and I'm not moving. I love to do things and to experience things and to go places. Very much enjoying that.
So I know that you're on the board, the advisory board for the engineering school at SDSU. How else do you participate in the community?
Well, I'm actually sometimes I have a hard time saying no. So I've actually been involved in my alma mater, which is Nevada, at the engineering board, and at San Diego State, advising my college fraternity. I was for 5 years the chairman of the Shawnee Foundation, which is based in San Diego, and it's geared toward helping children and families that are battling pediatric cancer. I'm pretty proud. Under my leadership, we basically increased our budget about fourfold, and actually took over all the summer camps from the American Cancer Society. They decided to get out of the camp world, and we took over all their summer camps, including a oncology camp where kids that are going through oncology can still come to camp and have a great experience, as well as really we think it's a first in the nation, a sibling camp. A lot of times when one child has cancer, the rest of the siblings sort of don't get quite the attention. So we actually run a camp of just nothing but siblings so that they can all share experiences and talk about what it's like to have a family that's been impacted by pediatric cancer.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's a very unusual thing. So I do that, of course, too. So that's plus, industry trade groups. So those are a couple of different things that I'm involved with. And I've been, historically involved with a number of different, chambers of commerce and industry trade groups also that are part of the community. Downtown Partnership in San Diego I've been part of. And yeah, I love those kind of things because there's such a need. And, the more effort you put in, you always get 10 times more back out of it. For sure.
No, absolutely. So if you look at your personal life, what is something that you have not accomplished that you really want to accomplish?
Ooh, I'm not sure I have an answer to that. And that might seem sort of crazy, but I'm the kind of guy that I sort of look around and there are more things that I would like to do, more places I'd like to go, more things I'd like to see, more people I'd like to meet than I will ever have time to do. Mm-hmm. And so from my perspective, it's a matter of trying to narrow down, what's realistic for me and what I would love to do with the time that I have left. Like everybody else, you only have a limited amount of time. So to me, I'm not sure that I know that yet. I'm in the middle of a process now trying to narrow down. I've always felt like I would be good in a public company environment because of my communication skills and my ability to work with all stakeholders. So I always sort of have a little itch to maybe get involved in there someday. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I have a knack in the M&A world, so I've thought about trying to do something further in that environment. Quite frankly, when I was growing up, I always wanted to get into politics. I always felt like I would be a great governor or congressman. So not sure I have the patience for that in today's environment, but I always felt like I'd be a great representative. And I don't know, maybe I need to just get over the general distaste that most Americans have for our elected officials.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, because and try it. I always when I was younger, I used to say, I'm gonna be governor, run for Congress, and I had people say, Bill, it'll never work. You're too honest. And I'm saying, oh, I still think there's a home someday for an honest person. They're like, yeah, I don't know. So
a businessman that believes in smaller government, I'll make a donation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll put you down as one of my first donors.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us so much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Jason, I appreciate the interview. I'm always happy to share and look forward to our future conversations.
Absolutely. Have a great day, Bill.
Great. Thank you.